Ahead of the massive protests against illegal lockdown measures on the 20th of March in London, Manchester, around the country and around the world, we thought it important to assess the likely police tactics in the capital based on their previous conduct at other protests, as well as likely measures protesters will use to defend themselves. Tube station ambushes. Police, following their successes in 2020 at the Save Our Rights protest, are likely to employ their strategy of ambushing protesters as they emerge from tube stations, or closing tube stations altogether. This prevents the forming of a crowd in which protesters may find safety. In response, protesters are more likely to travel in the last stretch by foot or bus, walking from stations that might be 1 or 2 stops away from the actual event, meaning that police would be stretched to cover such a large number of stations. Temporary processing centres. It's anticipated that police will again use temporary processing centres, such as the one that was located on King Charles Street, between Downing Street and Parliament Square, closing off both ends of the street. This allows them to lower the ratio of police and time they require to process one arrest or ticket, from many hours as they stretch to find London police stations with capacity, with often 3 or 4 police to one individual for this time, to possibly less than 1 hour, with a ratio of fewer than 2 police to each member of the public they arrest. This would allow them to arrest many more people than at some previous protests. However, this strategy is vulnerable as it requires the police to rely on their relatively small number of minimally guarded vehicles to rapidly move between the protest location and the processing centre, unless of course the protest is located in Parliament Square. Police have had trouble with individuals previously trying to flatten tyres to prevent unlawful arrests and render their operations impotent. While some have previously attempted letting down tyres manually, this has proved ineffective for the time it takes. It is more probable that protesters will therefore use small legal pocket knives, such as folding non-locking blades under 3 inches for general utility, such as cutting through or opening packaging, to puncture tyres in seconds and grind arrests to a standstill, as has happened at previous protests. Unlawful mass detention. Police are expected to employ unlawful mass detentions of protesters known as kettling. In previous protests, police have used this to tire, dehydrate and humiliate protesters, including the vulnerable, forcing elderly women to urinate publicly by denying them access to a toilet or any other of their rights which should be provided by arrest. This tactic allows police to slowly extract and only then arrest individuals one by one until they've captured every single person from inside their confines, as on November the 5th. This strategy does have the significant flaw, however, that protesters have almost nothing to lose from breaking out, given they will almost certainly be seized if they remain in place. Whilst individual attempts at breaking out of these often fail, organised groups of around 6 protesters charging at once are often enough to crumble thin police lines, and there is good chance that this may be practised by protesters or passers-by captured. Attacks on protesters. It is reasonable to think that police will again assault innocent people with weapons, as in previous protests. This is usually a tactic to prevent rescue of people unlawfully arrested. In response, it's likely that crowds will act to defend themselves with whatever they have to hand. In some protests, solid wooden walking sticks and metal water bottles, both legal, have been used. Bottles used as projectiles may also be employed, although this has proven unpopular in recent protests due to the liability to injure innocent protesters. Protesters are also likely to film the event in order to expose any crimes committed. As an aside, Resistance GB is seeking submissions of any crimes by the police on the day. If you record these, please email us at resistancegb@protonmail.com. Targeting of journalists. One very common police tactic is the targeting of journalists in order to prevent public scrutiny of their crimes. This has been experienced by many, including Subject Access, Resistance GB, Tyrant Finder UK, and Actual Interview. Subject Access himself was recently grabbed in Richmond in the first week of March, merely for being present the morning before events, whilst I was threatened by a gang of officers. There's a good chance that this will occur again. It will therefore be the duty of passers-by to defend any journalist in the conduct of their work from unlawful arrests, given that by both law and even the supposed regulations issued by the regime, journalism is a lawful activity that may proceed uninhibited. TSG deployment. The TSG, also known as stormtroopers, are likely to be out in force. These groups, composed of some of the most aggressive and violent police, are used as attack dogs to enforce compliance, often targeting children or small or elderly women. It is likely that protesters in response will have to group together to defend vulnerable groups, although whether they will do so is doubtful considering the unchecked abuse at previous protests such as Bishop's Park. While these are the probable tactics under the corrupt Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in compliance with the unlawful diktats from government, there may be a slightly different picture elsewhere in the country. The Manchester Unite the North rally in November went peacefully, with no arrests during that protest that I'm aware of. It may transpire that Andy Burnham has taken a less abusive line for March the 20th. Please do subscribe to our channel and share our journalism in your Telegram groups, WhatsApp, Signal, Facebook, Instagram, Gab, Twitter and elsewhere to help promote the good frontline coverage that we provide. All the best.